Stories of an Aircraft Builder. Geschichten eines Flugzeugbauers. TVAL, The Lord of the Things, or A New Zealand Adventure. The story I'm going to tell today started at the end of 2004 and goes hand in hand with my tale titled The Two Unequal Fokker D7s. Today's story has all the ingredients of a novel, like fortune, luck, joy, fame, trouble, scam, betrayal, prospect of prison, and so forth. From the outside, it looks like excellent fictional entertainment to live up a boring evening, but it was a cutting experience with severe consequences for the ones who actually went through it. This story is not fictional, and the resemblance to any living person is not accidental. The story of my life is well known in certain aviation circles. Today's story was preceded by an event that took place 2 years before, during 2002. I was contacted by a German national who was working for the Deutsche Bank in the UK, who wanted assistance with building a Fokker D7 replica. The agreement was that we, the German banker and I, would build 2 Fokker D7s simultaneously, one for me and one for him. He would pay for his own materials and contribute labor on his aircraft, working under my supervision. And so I sourced and purchased materials for both aircraft and started my aircraft as well as his. This story is highly interlinked with the story I'm about to tell, since this banker plays a prominent role in today's story and screwed everything up terribly. I documented the building of these 2 aircraft on the internet in the Aerodrome Forum website. My reports were posted there on a daily basis. Many people followed the builds, among them a well-known man from New Zealand with a deep passion for everything related to World War I aviation. His personal phone call reached me around Christmas 2004. It was a conversation which surprised and delighted me. He simply told me how much he admired my work and asked if I would be interested in building aircraft for him too. Of course was I interested. We exchanged several emails, and at some point he asked what I would like as payment for my service. At the time I was a shift worker with the German Railroad, and it was clear that I couldn't handle the build of 2 planes already in the process, plus the new projects under discussion, plus my railroad job. Something had to change to allow me to build all these aircraft projects, so I knew I would need to resign from the railroad job. On the spur of the moment, during the compensation discussion, I told him that I would love to work for him as a freelancer, and I wanted 10,000 euros per month, plus reimbursement for all material expenses for his aircraft. This was a high-end price quote, of course, and I was astonished and happy that he didn't negotiate aside from asking that the payments be in dollars rather than euros. Money never was of much interest to me, and to be honest, I would have done the job for less, but whatever the amount was, it had to be an improvement over my railroad pay. Also, I was ecstatic to be moving into much more interesting full-time work, be my own boss and build airplanes versus selling train tickets. A contract was then drawn up, a so-called mutual agreement, in which further details were specified. Due to the position of the New Zealander, the contract was not in his personal name, but in that of one of his companies, and the main part of the contract were obligations to maintain secrecy about current events within his company. He personally did not provide a signature. But there were also fundamentals in this contract, of course, such as payments and the planes that I was to build, the minimum working time that I had to provide for payments, the status of my independence and personal responsibility, and it was my duty and responsibility to pay any other worker who might work on the projects on my end. Insurance for the shops were paid by them, while rent and all like were all to be paid by me, and so on. All negotiations which were then set down in writing, were conducted with the New Zealander himself and with his right-hand man, Matt. They were the only people I had talked with about binding agreements. For me, these were all friendly agreements, from man to man, with a handshake and a word of honor. The subsequent signing of the contract was a formality of little importance to me. Well, naivety exposes one to punishment, and in the end it was punished. In order to complete the process, I was invited by the New Zealander to come to New Zealand and see him. At the same time, it would be a meeting to get to know each other. As a family man, I said that I would not come alone, which was no problem for him. He invited me, my wife and child to stay at the Duxton Hotel in Wellington for 14 days. I'm not a vacationer, and even though he wanted me to see New Zealand, I insisted on spending the days in his Wellington workshop instead of vacationing. During this time, the wife and child were entertained by his staff, while I was helping to build SE-5A aircraft. Our contract was signed on the premises of his film studios in Wellington. As I've already said, the contents of the contract were a personal agreement between the New Zealander and me. This point is important because apart from the financial side, the agreed working hours and the confidentiality agreement, everything else was constantly changed and thrown overboard. In particular, the aircraft to be built by me were fixed in the contract, but what I actually built were subsequent private agreements and arrangements between the New Zealander and me. According to our contract, I was supposed to build 2 Engels E4, that would be the Fokker E3, 2 Engels E2, that would be the Pfalz D3 or Pfalz D3A respectively. After I was back in Germany, I started with the implementation and construction of the Fokker E3 aircraft, but was soon contacted by the New Zealander with a request that an Engels E3, which would be the Fokker D7, should be built along with the other 2 already in the pipeline. Of course, these were deviations from the content of the contract, but as I've already mentioned, the commitment to contractual clauses was not important to me, and the agreement with the New Zealander in personal conversations were reason enough for me to deviate from the contract. It was possible, and why shouldn't I fulfill his wishes? You can talk to me. The 2 Fokker E3s took a back seat, and yet another D7 was slowly but steadily created. Of course, this additional D7 reinforced the impression on the Aerodrome Forum that I worked exclusively for myself and was ripping off the banker, who, by the way, was not adhering to our agreement. He had not paid for any of his materials and was not actively building. This self-centered impression on the forum was mainly due to the fact that the New Zealand contract allowed me to show the work, but not to mention who it was being done for because of the confidentiality clause. For those confused in the role of the banker, I may again refer to my tale, The 2 Unequal Fokker D7s. To be paid, I sent detailed monthly progress reports to New Zealand that included photographs in addition to the text and material invoices. They seemed very impressed with both the quality and the speed of the build, and seemed particularly impressed by the fact that I regularly exceeded the agreed weekly working hours. Today, when I look at the working hour sheets for the individual project, I'm amazed and impressed by the hours I put in. It didn't take long before the New Zealander requested that I add another D7 to the build schedule. His first D7 was a late model, and for the sake of completeness he wanted an early one too. We agreed that this new D7 project would be paid through trade. So the new D7 was therefore called D7 Trade, or TVAL project number 1586-1 in our build logs. A project was just beginning in New Zealand to create replica Ober-Ossarjuar 2 rotary engines, and I would be traded one of these motors in exchange for this new D7. While we were agreeing on the new D7 trade, the New Zealander acquired 2 Fokker D8 wings from a fellow aircraft builder in Vienna. The New Zealander asked me if I could build the rest of the aircraft for him, and of course I said yes, if the extra time didn't bother him. He agreed to his project slipping, but didn't want me leaving the banker out in the rain with his D7. Of course I never wanted the Bankers D7 project to suffer, but he wasn't upholding his end of our agreement. He had paid next to nothing and did very little work, so it was his own fault his project hadn't made much progress. His delays were not related to the work I was doing for New Zealand. I was delighted to be building a pair of D8s for the New Zealander, because I would be building one for myself in parallel with the New Zealander's aircraft, and with the Oberursel engine as a trade for the second D7 project, I would have an authentic engine for it. The Vintage Aviator Limited knew that I always built one of each type for myself at the same time. Additional work was not much greater, and the various project times were broken out precisely on the timesheets. And of course, did I tell the production manager there what I was doing. How could life get any better for me? The monthly payments and materials reimbursements had always been paid promptly, and the customer had provided me a backlog of interesting projects. And now I would also have a flying D8 for my own. The build schedule for all the airplanes under construction, the D7s, the original E3 and the Pfalz D3, slid further back as the New Zealander asked for the D8 to be completed first. So it happened. The Aerodrome Forum saw my work every day, and the negative impressions grew, as did the hostility of the envious and mockers, especially regarding the Bankers project as described in the story, the two unequal Fokker D7s. The Fokker D8 aircraft were the first aircraft to be completed as the New Zealander desired. There were 3 of them, 1 for me and 2 for the Vintage Aviator Limited. The New Zealander's D8s used the wings acquired from Vienna, while I built the remainder of the aircraft. I built everything on mine, including the wings. Since these 3 D8 projects were the last to be put into the nest, yet were finished the fastest, I called mine Cuckoo. The work began in 2005, and the New Zealander's 2 D8s were delivered in 2007 and early 2008. There they stood around in corners for ages, however, because no one dared to assemble them. Or maybe they wanted to make the sight of the planes a habit, to make the approval easier. I don't know. What was very interesting about this project for me was that the bare fuselages, that is the structure only, no internals, the tail unit and landing gear were sent to New Zealand when those components were completed. I built all the sub-assemblies, like engine, splash plates, tank, engine mount, etc., using only my Cuckoo, the 3rd aircraft, in the build as a template. I'm extremely proud of the fact that all the components manufactured here using Cuckoo fit perfectly on the New Zealand birds. I visited New Zealand for the 2nd time in 2009 to do the final assembly of their 2 D8 aircraft. Honest, Airbus had problems with that, and they had computers and not half the world between airframes. I also installed the Oberursel engines into the New Zealand D8s, and while I was there I was shown my Oberursel engines stored in a warehouse, which I could get in trade when I delivered Fokker D7. The Vintage Aviator Limited project number 1586-1 or Trade D7. The engine looked beautiful, and I was looking forward to being able to install it into my own Fokker D8 one day. In a way, the first airplane in my own flying museum here in Germany. Little did I know that things would turn out differently. Back in Germany, the further construction of the 4 D7 airframes resumed immediately. The E3s also made great strides and were soon able to travel to New Zealand as well. Everything went like clockwork, and I started building the Pfalz D3. Rudder and wing ribs were created. In the meantime, a project to replicate the Benz 4 aircraft engine, I think it was the Benz 4 that was mentioned, was started in New Zealand. I learned that the engines were for Rumpler C4 replica, and it wasn't long before the New Zealander asked if I would be willing to make historically correct drawings for the Rumpler C4, which would be used to build the aircraft in New Zealand. Well, why not? Another project added to the pile. I was able to measure the Rumpler C4 wreck owned by Marco Sommerau. Note, that C4 rack is currently rebuilt to static display conditions by Koloman Meyerhofer and is now owned by the banker, as far as I have heard. So, in addition to my work building replica aircraft, I made the Rumpler C4 drawings and sent them to the Vintage Aviator Limited. Of course it was a lot of work for a loner like me, but I did it all. The production of the tail units for the Rumpler C4 had started in New Zealand, and I was asked to push on the drawings faster, as they were building faster than I was supplying drawings. I was also asked to procure metric pipe in Germany and ship it to New Zealand for the construction of the steel pipe parts of the aircraft. I asked if I could send additional material at my expense so that an additional set of C4 tail units could be built for me. The New Zealander quickly agreed. The request for faster delivery of C4 drawings included a cryptic remark from the New Zealander that, after all, it was good business for me to deliver the drawings in exchange for my own aircraft. What? Beg your pardon? I just wanted the tail units from the additional steel tube that I had supplied at my expense. The New Zealander said, no, it's already planned. That I would also get a Rumpler C4. I pointed out that I didn't have an engine at all, and he replied, the engine came with the aircraft and that it was worth it to him. Of course I accepted with thanks. That was generous. His managers, consultants, later saw it differently. By the way, there's a video that proves this story. The video was filmed on a Saturday at Camp Street Workshops in Wellington, and it discusses the first test prints of the camouflage fabric I had made for the New Zealanders. In any case, at the end of the video, the New Zealander walks with the production manager along the storage rooms and shows the C4 tail units that have already been built. That is, the elevator, stabilizer, aileron, etc. As well as the drawings on the wall that I made. The whole thing is accompanied by the comment that they are very satisfied with the drawings and would like to have more quickly so that they can continue, and that they are confident that I like the tail units built for my aircraft. The production manager himself held exemplary components in his hands and showed them to the camera. For the drawings, I also made a translation list of terms that is still on the Vintage Aviator Limited's website today, at least by the time of this writing. Maybe one fine day I'll post the video too. Not because of the components, but because of the interesting information about the aircraft fabric that I did for them, which is still used by the Vintage Aviator Limited today. Personally, however, I'm surprised that the Vintage Aviator Limited had a new CAD drawings made from my drawings. What were they used for in the end? So, it's not like you might think that I'm sucking stories out of my fingers or make them up here. The video is available, as well as working hour spreadsheets and monthly reports and the email correspondence. I was a bit perplexed, I admit, but it was very enjoyable for me. I wonder if anybody else might have said no. At some point the New Zealanders realized that they had reached their own capacity limit, and they asked if I would be open to manufacturing the wings for the Rumpler C4 too. They also wanted me to make the streamlined tubes for the landing gear and other parts for it. The landing gear struts are heavy duty stuff, so that's what I did first. I was ready for that, and so C4 wing production started on the sideline. Again, all handcrafted with the help of my family and one additional worker. The agreed working hours had now been exceeded by 150% and in a few cases even by 200%, but I felt really good about it, and the progress we were making, wow. Since they wanted to build 3 C4 aircraft for themselves and 1 for me in New Zealand, everything was done 4 times. In addition to the D7 visible to the public, the wing ribs for the Pfalz D3 and the wing ribs and spars for 4 C4s were started. These were also completed. It worked. It was amazing. It was the perfect wave. However, the first storm clouds appeared. The banker's project was languishing. In addition, to not paying anything he had, not reported his aircraft to the LBA, which is the German Civil Aviation Authority, for the project application, so his aircraft was becoming less and less eligible for certification. He was not very happy, and now he was able to sneak into New Zealand and was up to mischief there. At the time I didn't know anything about it, and so ran into an open knife. He poked at me, and while in New Zealand directly sowed doubts about my honesty to the New Zealander himself. I now know the content of the conversations and know how he presented himself without blushing as the poor naive boy who was ripped off by the gangster Achim Engels. He even spread the word that the Office for the Protection of the Constitution was watching me because of my right-wing tendencies. How he managed to sow such distrust is a mystery to me, especially since the monthly reports and material invoices were presented to the New Zealanders. The material invoices had additional documentation including the quantities and intended use. All reports and invoices were examined individually every month, and all questions were clarified before payment, and all invoices and payments from New Zealand were made without exception. But suddenly everything became more formal. The Vintage Aviator Limited insisted that I immediately take an inventory of all materials purchased, an extra list of all invoices since the start of work in 2005, and to list every single screw used for each project. Of course, I didn't know the background at the time. The request wasn't a problem at all, as everything had been precisely documented by me. Still, it was stressful and time-consuming. Because of the audit, I didn't even go to the workshop. As requested, all the invoices were checked and everything was listed. I still have all of this documentation, and I can say today exactly what a particular screw cost and where it was installed. Every project that I made for the Vintage Aviator Limited had its own TVAL project number in addition to my own serial number. I know exactly which semi-finished product went into which machine, where it came from and how, where and when, by whom it was installed. Everything was documented and completely understandable and traceable. It had to be, since that level of detail was part of the government certification approval documentation, together with all welding protocols and all resin samples, etc., etc. Everything was available to the New Zealanders, including all load tests that I had performed and documented without being asked. TVAL were so concerned about every detail being documented, and yet they lost track of everything and screwed up big time by having official investigations and lawyers involved eventually. Absolutely unbelievable and unnecessary. The official audit and certification of that company was useless. Interesting in this context, since that moment there has been no personal contact with the New Zealander himself, like he had evaporated and disappeared. From then on, his agreements were no longer worth anything. Only contact was with managers, lawyers and accounting staff. I didn't really know what was happening to me and what was going on. In the meantime, I received an order from TVAL to immediately cease all TVAL work and to pack up their aircraft projects, materials and components and ship it all to New Zealand. And none of the listed files, aircraft in the original mutual agreement on which I had counted and built my life upon were to materialize. In short, the business relationship was ended unilaterally without giving any reason. At first, it was all incomprehensible to me, but as the remainder of the story about the banker and his D7 unfolded, the hidden story came to light. Then I saw more and more clearly that agreements with the New Zealanders were worth nothing, absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, I thought we had cleared up all accounting inconsistencies, but something bad was brewing. Although all the documents were internally consistent, the New Zealanders apparently had a lot of internal confusion and other problems that I was not aware of. The attempt to contact the New Zealander personally failed several times. No answers came, and I was only turned away. The lawyers took over this strange game, and that was a game I could not cope with, neither mentally as a human being, nor on a financial level involving big lawyers. No one at the Vintage Aviator Limited was allowed to talk to me, except the lawyers. This is common practice there, as I found out. That's the way they treat people. I discovered that the two D7s, one early, one late, which had been delivered to TVAL, had been sent to another fine builder in America to be finished. Why TVAL did that was still a mystery to me. Now all can see the reasons. Recall that one D7 was a trade arrangement. I delivered an airplane and they would deliver a new built Oberursel UR2 rotary engine, and that the trade was the New Zealanders' idea. In any case, I tried to sort out what happened to the rotary engine that I had already been shown and told it was mine. I was amazed when they told me that this deal had broken off, since an appraiser had determined that my aircraft were not approved at all, and therefore not worth an engine in exchange. Only later did I find out that the quality of the aircraft had already been clearly proven in TVAL's test laboratory, which is why they were released to America for completion in the first place. The Vintage Aviator Limited informed me that the defective Fokker D7 had been sent to the American builder and that he would pack it up and ship it back to me. In one of the emails I was told by one of the New Zealanders' lawyers that it was only thanks to the New Zealanders' good nature that nothing worse was going to happen to me. That knocked the bottom out of the barrel of insolence. Of course, the things promised about the Rumpler C4 and Pfalz D3 projects were no longer open to discussion. Everything I did was crap, and the reviewer would have found that it would not even meet the requirements of aviation approval in Germany. Yet the D8 was already flying. The TVAL website still says details coming soon. Well, I've been looking forward to it since the saying was emblazoned there. The Lord of the Things had decided that his word to a crook like me was worthless. Well, the E3 have not yet made their maiden flight, but I have been informed that it will not be long in coming, as the aircraft are as good as completed. Just as a side note, by the time I'm recording this, those are already flying, as many of you may already know or have seen. I also built one of those for myself, and this third one has been flying with Tavas in Australia for years. So these aircraft can hardly also be unfit to fly. It got really interesting when the container with the defective D7 arrived at my place. What did I find out? The two projects were mixed up. Despite everything and every component clearly marked, I received back the fuselage of the late Fokker D7, Engels E3008 or TVAL project number 1586, and the wings of the early version, Engels E3007 or TVAL project number 1586-1 or Trade D7. This is important because a bit confusing. So TVAL's aircraft is flying with the wings of the defective D7. The early D7 project, the defective project that scuttled the trade for the Oberursel engine. In addition, everything I built was determined to be crabbed, so it also is flying a non-airworthy fuselage. If the reader is taken aback, I understand. But TVAL's D7 wasn't yet flying at that point. The plane was with the American builder, and of course it became a topic of conversation there, because the half-truth about what was known around its creation were of course carried on by all those who believed they knew what was really going on, and one thing led to another. Legends about my incompetence and ignorance made the rounds. I used early fabrication techniques here, but late techniques there. Other parts would not have installed and had to be remade, so the rumors swirled around. Both planes arrived at the builder's shop in 2012, and it was 8 years later that the machine he was tasked to complete was finished. It made its first flight in 2020 in New Zealand. But that's not all. In order for the aircraft to get New Zealand approval, it first had to be registered as an experimental in another country, because it was not built by TVAL, at least not under the project number 1586 recorded there, which would identify it as built by me. The American came to mind for this. Now, he has to act as the builder for this approval and also indicate this to the US Aviation Authority and sign it. He must have built at least 51% himself, otherwise there is no approval. So he is now in the American official documents as the builder of this aircraft. And in the cockpit there is a beautiful badge that also bears his name as the builder. Whether everything is legally correct? Well, that's just how these people work. Gray areas are explored, and where there is no plaintiff, there's no judge. But for me the shit had just started, because one morning my apartment doorbell suddenly rang and the whole stable full of officials began to rummage through my house. You know what it is about? I was asked. No, I didn't. It was then they said that it was in the Wolf matter. Great, he'll never leave me alone, I thought. In fact, it was not just about the banker's business, but about securing all documents that I had shared with TVAL previously for the purpose of sorting out the invoices and materials. It was the banker who convinced the New Zealanders that I had written double bills and that I was cheating them. Not just in terms of the materials used, but he claimed I also betrayed them on the working hours. I could only have such high overtime because I included the time for my own aircraft there. Of course, the German Public Prosecutor Office found nothing, and no charges were brought, because everything was in order in both respects. My timesheets were completely traceable and credible, and the bills were all in order. The damage was done economically and in the family. It can no longer be made good. The investigation took forever, and the packed suitcase for my move to prison had long been in the corner of the living room waiting to be used. Sleepless nights for my wife and me. I still have the packed suitcase as a souvenir today. I've been accused of fraud. Yet, they go to an aviation authority and have someone else registered as the builder so that they can get approval, although they know exactly that the aircraft was built elsewhere and it is recorded in their system as job number 1586. They did not even do it by themselves, but recruit someone else who just wants to make a living out of aviation. Don't get me wrong here, I'm not accusing anybody of fraud myself. I'm just trying to tell the story as I know it was. If it is fraud or not, I don't care. This is just what happened. Others have to judge. I'm not going there. One does not keep to agreements and words of honor among men, but hides and sends lawyers. Fine thing, high-class company. These are all man-made things owed to profit and money addiction, as well as the fear of being ripped off. The really sad thing, however, is the technical incompetence and callousness with which they proceed here, and for decades the truth is blurred. There's talk of experts that are supposed to prove the unsuitability of airplanes, which strangely enough are now flying. A man's reputation is ruined and his livelihood is stolen from him. The soul and life of an entire family is endangered. And the result is more than disappointing. The mix of earlier and later Fokker D7 with Albatros instrument panel has been flying since 2020. I am still and nevertheless very proud of this aircraft because I built it. Even more, there are the individual parts of two different handcrafted aircraft that still fit together very well. What is really a shame is how the operator adorns himself with the fact that it is a historically correct replica of an early Fokker D7. He should know better, because during construction I shared all of my research in great detail with the Vintage Aviator Limited staff. I bet he does know better, and I do not give him the benefit of the doubt. He has this plane, and now it needs to sell. Special attention was paid to historical accuracy, and we were really very meticulous. I sent all of my historical documents to New Zealand, and each step was discussed before it was carried out. None of these documents were made available to the American builder for his work. I know that because I received a long letter from him in which he explained everything, apologized, and asked for understanding for his situation. I know because another real D7 expert pointed out the flaws enough times, and that it was obviously the fuselage of a late D7 and the wings of an early one. He just had to ask me, but then the fear of the big client was probably greater. Understandable. That's how things work. But why all this? When in the end, merciless incompetence ruins everything. Shame. Really a shame. And a pity. A great pity. As a person and as an aircraft manufacturer as well as a historian, I am more than disappointed in those people who cannot do anything themselves and who drag others through the cacao. I am seriously wondering what has taken almost 10 years to complete the aircraft. Or was it just the hope that Engels would forget it in the end? I am very sorry, but it's not how an Engels works. Now the plane is flying, actually both intermixed. This is proof that it is airworthy and always was. This is proof that it was an outright lie based on greed and profit, that there was an expertise that proved that the aircraft that Engels built could not even be approved in Germany, even though they operate several of them themselves. This refutes this expertise by those who created it. This is proof to me that the Vintage Aviator Limited had known that the aircraft were airworthy, because first of all, every step was documented. Every day an email was used to discuss what should be done and how and whether there was historical evidence for the respective execution. Every material was discussed beforehand, and every material processing was explained and confirmed and approved by the expert at the Vintage Aviator Limited. All these emails are undoubtedly still on the Vintage Aviator Limited server. But not only that, after the banker had not applied for the certification of his D7, and therefore it could not be officially airworthy, he spread the rumor that the aircraft were structurally not approved, whereupon the Vintage Aviator Limited only started to investigate the clue samples, the welding certificates, and to doubt the load tests I conducted. All the documentation came with the planes and the materials I was supposed to send to New Zealand, packed in large cardboard boxes and noted on the containers' lists, and were received upon arrival. Only now, that is afterwards, were the aircraft that were already in New Zealand, including the D7, carefully examined by the technical expert at the Vintage Aviator Limited. All materials and the entire processing were examined in detail under Warwick in the test department, and all doubts were dispelled. That's the only reason why the D8 and the D7 are flying now. Had this not been the case, the two D7 aircraft would not have been sent to America to be completed, but would have been put in the museum as static exhibits, and the American would have built new ones for the Vintage Aviator Limited. But now the wings of one project and the fuselage of the other projects are flying together as one. You make up your own thoughts now. Had they not been airworthy, they would not have been shipped to America in the first place, or at least the unworthy airplane would not have been shipped to America. The Vintage Aviator Limited commissioned me to build the aircraft. The internal Vintage Aviator Limited project number was 1586 and 1586-Roman 1 trade. At the time of delivery, all parts were completed except for the engine and covering. It was then handed over to the American to further completion. There both projects were mixed together, and on top of that, for whatever reason, the correct instrument board was exchanged for a type used by Albatros, a licensed manufacturer of Fokker D7 design. In order to give the late fuselage the impression of an early one, the fuselage tubes wrapped with camouflage material in the cockpit area were removed and rewrapped with unprinted fabric strips, and so on. Although it was commissioned work for me that was booked into the system at the Vintage Aviator Limited to gain approval in New Zealand, the aircraft were sent to the US, where the American was enticed to pretend to be the builder to the US Aviation Authority, so that the transfer to New Zealand could take place and the aircraft could receive New Zealand approval. In the United States, too, if a builder is seeking approval, he must build at least 51% himself and provide evidence of his own glue and weld samples. Laws, ordinances were thus bypassed there. Illegal? Grey area? A necessary way to legally get an airplane into the air? May be anything, but to cause such human damage, to bend laws and twist truth, is dubious, at best. Money, they say, spoils the character. Well, I don't want to touch that stuff anymore, and I don't want to have anything more to do with this breed of people. I am firmly convinced that if the character of some of the people involved had not had such a serious impact, I would have been able to do more together with the Vintage Aviator Limited than this already admired by others. The Fokker E3 could have flown a long time. The Rumpler could be ready long ago. The Pfalz as well. And these are all projects that were deliberately cancelled, thwarted, and destroyed in ignorance. I don't even want to talk about the planned projects that were still before our eyes. No doubt, the Vintage Aviator Limited does a very good job, and there are many good people there, and many are happy about what is on offer there. But this expert knows that it is not the historically and technically, as well as human and business perfection that shows itself to the outside world. However, I'm really looking forward to seeing the two E3s flying that I built for them. Their sister, my own Engels E4 Fokker E3, which was created at the same time, has been flying in Australia for years now. Or the Rumpler C4, whose individual parts have been laying around there for ages. And the Pfalz D3, wonderful projects. However, I would like to state that I have not published this story to get revenge or anything like that. It can never be undone. Viewed from a distance of time, all of this is too funny. I can't take these people seriously. These people must be able to see in their mirror for themselves the things that they did. I wrote it down so that my children know the story, and so I can reflect on it again and learn from my own mistakes. And I owe it to my late and dear Alexandra, who suffered a lot from all that. For over 10 years, the truth was told by others, and I kept quiet and listened and suffered. Now, both these 7 that I built for the Vintage Aviator are flying together in one project, an incredible satisfaction that belies them all. It's just time to throw my truth into the ring too. In any case, they are judged by a completely different authority, which they too cannot escape.